It is truly an honor and privilege for me to be here today. It came at me at quite a surprise, and I did ask Rose, like, why me of all people? I felt that war photographers and journalists that cover major events have a greater voice than mine. And I just wanted to take this opportunity and salute the great war photographers and journalists that put themselves in harm's way to capture images that are truly compelling and help to tell stories that can end wars. My story is a little bit different, but hopefully, it may have some impact as years go on. But very interesting story. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York during the summer of 1960, and this is my community right here. This particular photograph I took about 20 years ago, and it's symbolic to me on a journey, a crossroads in my life. How can I say this here? My life is pretty much a cross between Forrest Gump and the Book of Eli, for those that saw that movie. And I mean that sincerely. It's in watching the Book of Eli that I start to understand my purpose as a visionary. And I realized that I had a purpose to record life. I'm so thankful with the gift of vision. In a time when so many people can't see, I have this divine gift, and I count my blessings every day. So what I strive to do is use my vision to create images that could be contributed to the archives of the world. So a lot of the work in which I make, I donate it to museums and libraries, because I feel that's where it belongs. It doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the people. So I create images just to contribute to world history and culture. And looking at Forrest Gump, it's like, that's it. That's a part of my life, and all of us have had those type of experiences. But when I saw the movie Forrest Gump, it really hit home for me because I am a child of the 1960s. I was greatly impacted by the Vietnam War and a lot of the events that we see in that film. So in combining those two together, it helped me to understand my greater journey in life, how I need to tell stories, I need to preserve my history. But this is my beginning right here, South Brooklyn, Red Hook Community Projects. This is my mother here, the one in the middle, looking into the mirror. I was very blessed to have a wonderful mother that was a nurse, and through her being a nurse, she taught me compassion. Her medical books taught me about, the human body and the whole thought process. So I was truly blessed to have a good mother, Southern-born, that gave me a good foundation, taught me compassion, humility. My father is the guy in the top in the middle. This is my father in 1949 when he was a young blue jacket. He was destined to go into the military at this young age. His mother died in a car accident when he was young, so his father, who was also in the military, saw fit that he got some type of military training. So this is my father in his youth. I believe he's about 15 at this age here. This is a small photograph, and this is my father here when he went into the Navy in 1950. He was fortunate at the age of 17 to go in as a Navy photographer. And to the best of my knowledge, those are some of the best photography schools in the world. Through my father, he spent 8 years in the military, and he would travel throughout the world. And he would bring his world back to me in the form of his photographs. So as a young child, I was able to see images from Greece, from Portugal, from Spain, from England, and I was fascinated with photography. And what's interesting too, all my father's uncles were all in the military, and all of my mother's brothers were in the military. So my whole family structure was based on the military. My mother had 6 sisters, and they all married military men. So documenting military culture has always been a part of my life. This is my generation right here. This is a photograph I took about 25 years ago, and it really sums up what I was going through, what I was seeing in the 1960s. Life magazine was a publication that was in my house all the time, and it gave me a chance to venture outside my community and see what was happening around the world. And at that time, we had the Vietnam War, and we had unrest in this country, in various cities, especially after the death of Martin Luther King. So I recreated this image to just have a piece of my life. It's actually like a puzzle of my life in terms of what I saw as a young child coming of age. I was a very visual person. During my free time, I would always go to the library and just research magazines and publications to gain knowledge. I was fortunate back then, for you guys over 50 years old, we had a program, Mike Wallace Biography. I absolutely loved that program. It fed my mind with world issues, and it made me just want to know what was happening in the world. Through Mike Wallace, I learned about Gandhi, I learned about Mussolini, Hitler, and it was one of my favorite programs on television. So I always had a profound love for knowledge. This is very interesting right here. This is not a mistake either. and I don't hope not to offend anyone, but it's very important that I tell this story here because my father, being a Navy man, I guess he read Playboy in the Navy. And as a young child, he had all these magazines in binders just neatly stacked. And I would start analyzing them. And I said, wow, this is a powerful publication. I actually read the stories in them. No one really believes. They said, now, you didn't read the story. You had to look at the pictures. I'm not going to tell you I didn't look at the photographs, but I was moved in looking at the stories. And in reading Playboy magazine, I was introduced to Malcolm X, George Lincoln Rockwell, Miles Davis, Martin Luther King, Frank Sinatra, John Wayne through Playboy magazine. And I would get the 50th anniversary, and I would go back, and I say I was just blown away with how powerful Playboy magazine was. I had no idea that Playboy had some of the best writers in the country. And I would read it from cover to cover, and it opened up my world to a whole nother situation. And I must say, you know, in looking at the photographs, I learned composition, lighting, and beauty. These are some of the interviews that were in Playboy. And I mean, I read them from cover to cover. And I was amazed that years later, I would find that Alex Haley was one of the main interviewers that interviewed Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and George Lincoln Rockwell. This is a very important picture in which I pulled up, because I read about John Wayne in Playboy also, because he was a hero of mine, and he was definitely a hero of my father coming up, but I read something that troubled me about him in Playboy magazine, but it didn't take me from seeing this movie. And this particular movie here, The Green Berets, was the very first movie I went to see with my father. Being my father was a military man, he wanted to see about this, what was going on in Vietnam. Very interesting too, because I learned about Vietnam in Playboy magazine. I'm 6, 7 years old at this time, but I knew that something was going on wrong over there. So at that young age, I became very curious. So this movie here just blew me away as a young child. I was horrified with the things I saw. And I wanted to know more about what was Vietnam about at this time. Being that so many men in my community were being drafted and going off to war, I wanted to know what was it about. So this movie, which I read about later on, it was anti-communist, and it was more like a pro-military movie, but nevertheless, it gave me a feel of what was going on in Southeast Asia at that time, when so many people had no idea what Vietnam was. So it actually sparked something in me as a young child to learn as much as I could about Vietnam. And I became almost obsessed with it as a young child. This, for you guys, again, over 50 years old, came out in Life magazine in 1969, and it blew me away. It's very personal, this particular image here, because it shows you the cost of war from one side. And we're just speaking about 1 week. Back in 1967, July 27, 1967, I was 7 years old. I remember when 2 military personnel came into my community to notify a woman that her son had died in Vietnam. I would just find out more of this information a few weeks ago due to Facebook. I didn't know a name at the time, but by Facebook, I realized who the person was that died on July 27, 1967. His name was Sam White. And what's interesting about his death is that it was summertime, we were out of school, we were playing, and when the 2 military personnel came in the community, everything went into slow motion. We stopped everything we were doing and we watched them. We knew that something bad had happened. And sure enough, within a few minutes, when they went into the woman's apartment, we heard a scream that echoed throughout the whole entire project. Her only son, at 21 years old, who was drafted, died in Vietnam due to a landmine explosion. And just a few weeks ago, I was able to go to Washington at the Vietnam Memorial. I located his name, and I was able to just bring closure to that traumatic experience that happened to me when I was younger. And later on, so many more men would die in my community in a similar fashion. So I found this on the internet, and I felt it was very necessary to show the images of these young men who have died in the war. And it just really touched me because they came from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, but they died in a very senseless war. And I'm willing to take questions too. I initially was just going to run through this here, but if you have any questions, do feel free to ask. Of course, as a young child, I came up seeing this photograph, and it gave me nightmares for a long time. This made me really want to understand what the hell is going on in Vietnam. Here I am, 9 years old, and I'm looking at the terror on this woman's face. And I would spend years with this photograph trying to understand what happened at My Lai. and what was it like to be drafted, going to Vietnam, being placed in a situation like this here. I think about the horror of this woman, because after this photograph was taken, the whole village was annihilated. And I just look at the terror on this woman's face. I look at the woman in the background who's fixing her clothes because she was probably sexually abused. So again, as a young child, I'm seeing horror and brutality that stayed with me. A veteran returning from war. This was in one of the Time Life books that my father had in his home. And just looking at the expression on this man's face, and I went back to Sam White and how he died in a landmine explosion, but I thought about the other men who were wounded in war and they came home like this here. Another reflects the cost of war. Again, these are images that I'm ingesting as a young child that's helping me to despise war. I wanted to know about the American soldiers, but I also became very interested in the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army. And this is a field hospital where you have Viet Cong nurses working, you know, on a wounded soldier. And you just look at the tenacity of these people. And it just really amazed me. And I want to know more about the Viet Cong. Who were these Viet Cong? What were they fighting for? So again, I became obsessed with just Vietnam, wanting to learn more about this here. This image was taken by Bill DeLevy, and it helped to drive home another question about the black Americans' participation in Vietnam, especially in the time of Muhammad Ali when he made the statement about the Viet Cong not calling him a nigger. I want to understand what was it like to be a black man drafted going into Vietnam during a time of civil unrest. So this image just really stayed with me, and it propelled me to want to interview soldiers that were in Vietnam during the assassination of Martin Luther King, and what was it like during that time period? What was it like coming home? Now I'm going into the 1970s now. This photograph won a Pulitzer Prize. The young man being stabbed is actually an attorney. It escapes me who the photographer was at this time, but I remember this here. You know, dealing with the whole issue of Vietnam and war and soldiers coming together as one. And then to see a lawyer in South Boston being stabbed with the American flag, it did something to me. It showed me the power of photography, but it also allowed me to realize that there's a problem in this country. And this is not Mississippi nor Alabama, but it's South Boston. And this photograph haunted me just like the women being massacred, about to be massacred in Vietnam. It just troubled me like, what's going on here? And I appreciated photography, the photographer, for capturing this thought-provoking image. Same time, this is 1971 Kent State. You know, protesters were shot protesting the US invasion of Cambodia. And I remember this vividly as a young child, seeing this unfold on television. And again, you know, we have a war going on in Southeast Asia. We have college students being shot. We have people being beaten. And this is a whole other side of the story. And I think this photograph really helped to contribute to the end of Vietnam. Now I'm going to take it a little bit into my journey. You know, for you guys, again, who are over 50 years old, you know, this program changed my life. Kung Fu was a mini-series that came on in 1971, I believe from 1971 to 1975. It was a gift for me as a young man on a journey. I needed some type of direction, you know, because I was always searching for knowledge. I stayed in the library, I read National Geographic, always trying to elevate myself. But when this movie came on, it helped to put me on the path. Because, you know, the actor David Carradine, the actor, I forgot the person's name that he played, but it was always about the path and enlightenment. So in watching Kung Fu, this series, there was always a moral message in it. You had a young man that was being trained in a Shaolin temple, Amerasian, and then once he completed that training, he came into America, and he put everything to use. So I looked at this as a guide for me as a young man to train myself mentally, physically, and spiritually for a purpose in life. I didn't quite know what that purpose was, but I knew that this program gave me some type of direction to be a man of peace, to be a man who understands humility and empathy. So this gave me so much knowledge as a young 11, 12-year-old kid to help me navigate through a lot of difficulties in life. This is my generation, and this represents really 1975, growing up in Brooklyn, New York. While I was on the path of enlightenment, I came upon a young man that was a member of a notorious gang in Brooklyn called the Jolly Stompers. And he was, despite him being a head in that organization, he saw some type of greatness in me to allow me into his home and look at his photographs. And while looking at his photographs, I came upon hundreds of photographs of young men posed like this here, dressed this way, standing upright, dignified, wearing hats. And in looking at those photographs, I said, wow, I want to be a photographer, and I want to take photographs like that. And what makes this picture very interesting in regards to my community, a lot of men were inspired by Western movies. So back in the early 70s, a lot of gang members took on the Western philosophy, and they started wearing like these hats here. And some of them even carried guns, emulating cowboys. So very interesting time period. So these type of images inspired me to pick up my camera and go into my community. I wasn't prepared to go to war at the time, but I wanted to at least pick up a camera and have a purpose. The camera became like a compass to me. In studying the program Kung Fu, it put me on a path. Now the camera became my compass. And it helped to guide me and see things with the third eye that I wasn't able to see, what most people just walk by, but having a camera now, I'm looking at different things. I'm seeing beauty. Time is up? Wow. I didn't even know it. I didn't really realize that. I'm so sorry. Wow. I'm so sorry. I thought I had so much. I didn't even look at the time there. So many more stories I want to tell. But that's pretty much it. Time is up. But thank you for your time. I'm studying a little bit. I apologize for that. So I just run through these images right here. I came home from the Army. Well, it's so much. It's such a long story there. But these are all images when I returned home from the Army. Despite the war, I went into the military in 1977. Spent 20 years working corrections. And I have to say before I close, these are two young soldiers that were really excited about going to war. Never saw a Fahrenheit 9/11 before, so I introduced them to Fahrenheit 9/11, and I invited them to come to me to Arlington Cemetery. So I brought them to the cemetery so they could see the cost of war. And while we were there, we came upon this family that lost their captain from Pakistan in Iraq. And when the two young soldiers saw them, they broke down and cried. And this is my last photograph, because I want to end on the cost of war. Because in this photograph, what amazed me is not only the family, but to your left, you have a Buddhist symbol. And it was a young Buddhist Marine that died in Iraq. You have the Muslim flag, and then to the right, you have a Christian, a white Christian. To the far right, you have a black Christian. So this photograph is very important to me to show the cost of war and to know that, so many people are dying of different religions every single day over nonsense. So thank you so much for your time. I wish I had more time.